Does funding opportunities for Indigenous communities interest you? The TELUS Indigenous Communities Fund is designed to support projects that promote community well-being. Joe and Sally will discuss how this fund works and how to apply. Okay, let's get started.
Together we rise and take a stand.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be taking a look at a really interesting funding opportunity, specifically for Indigenous-led projects all across Canada. I was listening to a song the other day, and it kind of got me thinking, about all the ways that we can support Indigenous communities here in Canada. So that's when I came across the TELUS Indigenous Communities Fund.
Oh, yeah, that's awesome. Music is such a powerful way to, get you thinking about these things.
It really is.
So the TELUS Indigenous Communities Fund, or the ICF, as it's often called, is a grant program that's designed to empower Indigenous communities by providing financial support for all of their different initiatives.
Yeah, and that's what's so great about this, right? It's not just about awareness. It's about taking actual steps towards reconciliation. So can you tell us a little bit more about TELUS's motivation behind this fund? Like, why is this so important to them?
Absolutely. So TELUS is really committed to reconciliation with Indigenous people. And they see this fund as a way to support self-determination and community-led solutions. They acknowledge that there's been historical injustices that Indigenous communities have faced. And so they want to invest in a better future for everybody. And what's really interesting here is that TELUS understands that reconciliation requires action, not just words.
Yeah, I love that. They're putting their money where their mouth is.
Yeah.
So let's get down to the details here. Who can apply for this grant?
So the fund is primarily open to Indigenous-led organizations, and this could include a bunch of different groups, like band councils, Indigenous governments, community groups, and nonprofits. But there's actually a really interesting thing here. Non-Indigenous-led organizations can also apply.
Oh, really? Oh.
Yeah, but only under certain circumstances.
So tell me more about that.
Yeah, so they can only apply if they've got a really strong partnership with an Indigenous organization, and if they can show documentation that the Indigenous organization supports their application. So this is to really emphasize that the projects that get funded are actually driven by the needs of the Indigenous communities.
That makes a lot of sense. So now we've got this incredible opportunity. But what kind of projects does this fund actually support? Like, what are they looking for?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the scope of this is pretty broad, which is really cool. It allows for a lot of creativity. But broadly speaking, the fund supports projects that fall under these categories: health, education, environmental preservation, community building, and language and cultural revitalization.
Wow, so quite a big range there.
So if you've got a project that addresses a need in an Indigenous community, and it aligns with one of those themes, then you're on the right track. But it's more than just fitting into a category. You really have to show that your project has the potential to make an impact, and that it can be sustained over time.
Okay, I see. Can you give us an idea of what one of these impactful projects might actually look like?
Oh, for sure. Let's take the Labrador Friendship Center as an example. They actually received funding to provide laptops to community members who were facing barriers to education and connectivity, which is such a crucial thing, especially for people in remote communities. And their project directly addresses that.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Another great example is the Winnipeg Indigenous Friendship Center. They used their grant to create a 24-hour safe ride service for women, which directly responds to a need for safety that was highlighted by the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls inquiry.
Those are such great initiatives. It's amazing to see how this funding turns into real tangible changes in people's lives. So say someone has this great project idea and they know they're eligible to apply. What are some of the requirements and potential barriers they should be aware of? Like, what hoops do they have to jump through to actually get this funding?
Okay, well, first off, you have to remember that this is a competitive process. Not everyone who applies is going to get the money, unfortunately. The application window actually opens twice a year, and the deadlines are in March and October. And they only accept 200 applications for each cycle. So my advice would be, don't wait until the last minute. Get that application in early.
Yeah, good advice. Is there anything else that people should keep in mind? Like, how much money are we talking about here?
Yeah, so the grants range from $5,000 to $25,000, which gives a lot of flexibility to different projects. You also have to be patient. There's a 12-week waiting period to hear back after you submit your application. They really want to make sure that they review all the proposals. And of course, like any funding program, they have some specific exclusions. So for example, they won't fund for-profit initiatives or requests for retroactive funding. They also won't fund religious projects or sponsorships. So just make sure that your project aligns with all their guidelines.
Okay, great. So you've got this awesome project, you meet all the criteria, you're ready to apply.
Yeah.
How do you actually apply? Where do you go?
We've made it super easy. You can find a link to the guidelines and the application portal on the TELUS Indigenous Communities Fund website. And we've even included that link in the episode description down below.
Perfect. So now let's shift gears a little bit. I want to ask our listeners this. If you had access to this funding, what kind of project would you create? What needs do you see in your community that could be addressed with this?
That's such a great question. It's a good opportunity to take a minute and really reflect on what's going on around you. Think about the challenges that your community is facing, how you could use technology to help, and what kinds of outcomes you're hoping to achieve.
And remember, we don't want you to come up with a full project proposal right now.
Yeah.
We're just trying to get your imagination going.
Exactly.
Maybe it's something you've been thinking about for a while.
Yeah.
Or maybe this conversation has given you a brand new idea.
Yeah.
Either way, it's a good exercise to think about how you could make an impact.
It really is. Sometimes just starting to think about these things can lead to making a real difference.
Yeah, so true.
And remember, impact can take a lot of different forms. It could be about improving access to essential services, or preserving cultural heritage, or creating opportunities for economic empowerment.
I like that. That reminds me of some of the projects that we came across in our research, like the Fox Lake Cree Nation.
Yeah.
They used the funding that they got to tackle food insecurity. And now they're working to provide fresh produce and more access to traditional foods.
Interesting.
Which is such a basic need.
Well,
and they're being really innovative in how they're addressing it.
yeah, and what's interesting about that project is that it's not just about providing food, it's about reclaiming those traditional foodways, which have, a deeper cultural and spiritual significance.
Oh, totally. It's about nourishing the entire community in a lot of ways. Then there's also the Nanawakolas Council Society in British Columbia. They use their grant money to expand this sustainable clam gardening program. I was so fascinated by this when I read about it.
Yeah, that one really stood out to me too. It's a great example of how environmental stewardship and cultural preservation can go hand in hand. They're revitalizing these ancient agricultural techniques while also boosting the productivity of marine species.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's like this perfect cycle of sustainability and tradition. And what I find so inspiring about all of these projects is how they're all bringing together these different aspects of community well-being, like cultural, economic, environmental, and social.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks to the complex nature of reconciliation itself. It's about addressing the past, but it's also about empowering communities to thrive in the present and to build a better future for themselves.
Okay, so before we wrap up today, let's go back and make sure that our listeners have all the information they need. So where can people go to find out more about this and how to apply?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, you can find all the details on the TELUS Indigenous Communities Fund website. That's where you'll find the guidelines, eligibility criteria, and the application portal. And to make things even easier for you, we've included that link in our episode description.
Perfect. So make sure to check that out after the show. And while you're at it, if you're enjoying this deep dive and you want to hear more conversations like this in the future, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give us a like.
Yes, please do. We love hearing from you.
And if you know anyone who might be interested in this funding opportunity, please share this episode with them.
Yeah, spread the word. It's an easy way to help make a difference.
Totally. The more people who know about this fund, the more amazing projects we can help make happen.
I agree.
Okay, so I have one final thought-provoking question for everyone. What kind of impact do you think this fund and others like it could have on the future of Indigenous communities all across Canada? Like, what do you imagine for the future?
Oh, that's a great question. That question really fills me with a lot of hope. I think if we keep supporting these Indigenous-led initiatives and we empower the communities to, create their own solutions, and we build strong partnerships based on respect, then the possibilities are really endless. We've already seen how much potential there is from the projects we talked about today. And I think this fund is a great step in the right direction.
Yeah, I agree. It's not just about fixing what happened in the past. It's about building a future where Indigenous communities can thrive and where their voices are heard. It's definitely a future that I want to be a part of. And I hope our listeners feel inspired to get involved too.
I think everyone can contribute in their own way. It doesn't have to be a huge thing. Just learning more about Indigenous history and culture, or supporting Indigenous businesses, even just having respectful conversations with each other. We all have a role to play in reconciliation.
Yeah, I love that. Well, this has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge with us today.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And a huge thank you to all of our listeners for joining us on this deep dive into the TELUS Indigenous Communities Fund. We hope you learned a lot today. And don't forget to check out the episode description for all the links and resources we mentioned.
Yes, and if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to like it and subscribe to Timely Trends and News for more.
And share this episode with anyone you know who might be interested. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching this episode of Timely Trends and News. I'd like to take a moment to share that the voice used for this podcast is a voiceover, and the photo you see here has been enhanced using AI technology. Please note, when I use Notebook LM to create the podcast, some Indigenous community names might not be pronounced correctly. I deeply respect all communities and their identities, and I always strive for accuracy. If there are any corrections or suggestions, please feel free to share them kindly in the comments. Your support means the world to me. Please like, share, and subscribe to Timely Trends and News for more updates. See you in the next video.